Hello, and thank you for taking the time to explore how your study away experience can be drawn upon for professional purposes. As you well know, your time away was likely impactful, challenging, and you probably feel that you grew a lot. However, it may not feel obvious to you or others how the lessons you took from that experience could translate to a professional setting. This is exactly what we'll explore during this virtual workshop. And on that note, let's begin with what you can expect to get out of this workshop. It's my hope that by the end of the workshop, you will have the tools to identify your key outcomes from study away, to connect your study away outcomes with professional competencies. You'll also have the chance to practice articulating experience for professional purposes, and you'll be able to identify your next steps and other helpful resources. Before we dive in, make sure you have a blank document or piece of paper and writing utensil. Basically, something and somewhere to write your ideas. You'll also want the list of 75 long-term outcomes from the University of the Pacific. You'll want the list from NACE with key attributes that employers look for in recent graduates, and the worksheet called Connect Study Away to Your Career. You can find links to these 3 documents on the PLU Study Away website under the Reflect tab. If you don't have these right now, I recommend you pause and get set up. Now, to warm ourselves up and to get back into the study away headspace, think about yourself before, during, and after your study away experience. I'll provide examples, and then you can take the time to do this on your own. When I think of myself before I studied away, I was quite achievement-oriented. I was always doing whatever I had to do to get an A. I was also very uncomfortable speaking Spanish, even though I had taken a couple of years of coursework in college. Lastly, I saw many issues as right or wrong. There was little room left for ambiguity. So these are a few of my characteristics from before study away. Now you can pause the video and take the time to think of a few characteristics that you had before you studied away. All right, now we'll think of characteristics of your experience while you were away. Again, I'll show an example before you work on yours. While I was away, I was very aware of various identities, my own and others. This is likely because I'm a white, cisgendered, middle-class female, and frankly didn't recognize many aspects of my social identity before studying away. I was also frequently confused about social situations. I knew that I was missing some social cue, but couldn't always figure it out. Lastly, I was very curious. Every day felt new and interesting. Okay, so now it's your turn to reflect on your experience while you were away. You can pause the video until you're ready to move on to the next box. Lastly, we'll think about where you are now that you've returned. This is a great time to consider how you have changed as a result of your study away program. Again, I'll provide an example. So for me, when I returned, I quickly realized how much more comfortable I felt communicating with others. I figured if I can live in a new place, make all new friends, and survive in a different language, then communicating in my own community seemed much easier. I was also quite aware of aspects of my own culture, and also very critical. My culture seemed normal before, and I never gave it much thought until I returned home. I was also much more comfortable with ambiguity. Having lived in a different country where I didn't understand customs and systems made it much easier for me to go with the flow and suspend judgment. So again, this is your turn to pause the video and reflect on how you are different now that you're back from study away. All right, I hope you found this exercise interesting and you're now back in your study away headspace. So we just brainstormed how our characteristics changed by having studied away. And now we'll look at what lessons you likely learned from having studied away. For this exercise, you'll need the list of 75 long-term outcomes from the University of the Pacific. So what you're going to do is review the list and select 5 to 10 outcomes that you feel you developed or strengthened. I want you to choose at least 2 from the first section. If there is one or multiple that you feel you'd like to include, but it's not on this list, feel free to add it. This list is just a starting point, and it's certainly not designed to limit you. Okay, so now you can pause and continue once you have your list of the top 5 to 10 outcomes. I also went through this exercise and pulled out 5 outcomes that I feel that I got from my study away experience. So we'll continue to refer back to these as we work our way through the workshop. At this point, you've determined some of the key outcomes from your study away experience, and now we'll begin to look at key competencies or attributes that employers look for in recent graduates. So for this part, you'll need the list of NACE's key attributes employers seek on students' resumes. If you don't have it up, now is a good time to pause and bring it up. Okay, so here I have the top 10 listed, but there are others, as you can see on the list that you have. I would like to point out that this list was created by NACE, who each year surveys employers in the U.S. to figure out which attributes employers seek most in recent graduates. So the great thing about this is this data is directly from employers. Our next step will be to draw the connections between your list of study away outcomes and these competencies that employers seek. I want you to revisit your study away outcomes that you selected from the list of 75 and ask yourself, do any of these align with the employer attributes I just looked at? In order to help you answer that question, we'll use this worksheet. So ideally, you could print this worksheet, but if not, you could do this on a piece of your own scratch paper. Along the left-hand side, you can write your top study away outcomes. Again, these can be from the list of 75 or ones that you came up with on your own. Then you'll go through each one and consider which of the career competencies, and I have them listed along the right-hand side, that it may support. Please note that a study away outcome could support more than one career attribute. As you're doing this, you can draw arrows to the career competencies that your study away outcomes support. Here's an example. So if you remember from the list of 5 that I had, one of my outcomes was that I'm more balanced in my judgments. And I feel that I could connect this to problem solving. So I'm now better able to consider various viewpoints, suspend judgment, and collaborate with others in order to effectively solve problems. Okay, so now you can pause the video and take as much time as you need to work through this. Again, you'll write your study away outcomes along the left side and then draw arrows to the career competencies that you feel they support. Okay, now that you've connected your study away outcomes with career-related attributes, you likely noticed that as you were physically drawing those lines, you asked yourself how you can justify that a study away outcome supports a career attribute. Many of the attributes listed along the right-hand side, you'll find listed on job descriptions. So keep these study abroad outcomes and this process in mind when writing resumes. Next, we'll begin thinking about these concepts for interview purposes. Okay, so here I have a list of general interview questions. Now, of course, you don't always have to use a study away example to answer the question, and for many cases, study away may not be the most appropriate experience to draw from. But for the sake of this workshop, I'll use a study away response for an example. So let's say an interviewer asks me number 3. Tell me about a time when you were under a lot of pressure. What was going on and how did you get through it? So here's my response, and I want you to think about its effectiveness. Okay, so when I studied abroad in Oslo, Norway, I felt that I was constantly under pressure. I had so much work for classes, and it was hard to navigate the city when I couldn't read the language. But in the end, I got used to it and everything was fine. Okay, So now ask yourself, what did I just convey to a potential employer? Does this help them understand how I would work through hardship? Does it indicate what kind of team player I might be? Probably not. Now, the interviewer might be impressed that I studied in Oslo for a semester and was able to feel good about the way things ended up, but my answer could have been so much richer. My response is an example of how study away doesn't necessarily speak for itself. In fact, that's probably the case with most of your experiences. It's really up to you to help them understand how your experiences, including study away, will help make you a great addition to their organization. Okay, so now you might be thinking, well, how do I do that? Along the right-hand side, you can see two methods. One is the CAR method, and the other is the STAR method. For CAR, you first describe the context of the situation you're drawing from. Next, you explain the action that you took, and you end your response with the result. So the STAR method is quite similar. You start by describing the situation, then the task at hand, and finally the action and result, just like the CAR method. Okay, so now I'll try this again and use the same example as before, but using this new method. Okay, so again, the interviewer asks me, tell me about a time you were under a lot of pressure. What was going on and how did you get through it? So here's my response using the STAR method. In the fall of my third year at PLU, I studied abroad in Oslo, Norway for 4 months, where my coursework focused on peace and conflict studies. Higher education in Norway is structured differently than in the US. We only had 2 pieces of assessment for each class. One was a large paper and the other one was an exam. Both are due near the end of the term. I felt very stressed knowing that my entire grade was based on just 2 pieces of assessment. Once I learned about this structure at the beginning of the term, I made a detailed reading and study schedule for myself spanning over the entire semester. That way, I held myself accountable and made sure not to put everything off until the very end. Ultimately, it was great because I was more engaged during lectures, I learned so much about peace and conflict through Norwegian lens, and I earned a pretty decent grade. Okay, so now let's break this down into the framework. First, I discussed the situation as being an international student in Oslo for a semester while studying peace and conflict. My task was to complete the paper and exam, which was a new format for me, and to complete them at a level of quality that I was proud of. My action was the study schedule I created, and the result was the class engagement and my grade. Okay, so now it's your turn. I want you to select at least one interview question and then think of a study away experience that you can draw from and use one of these methods we've just talked about. So if you're doing this alone, you could first write down your response and then say it aloud. If you're with others, practice being the interviewer and interviewee, and you can provide each other with feedback. Okay, so now you can pause the video until you're ready to move forward. Okay, so now we'll wrap this up, but I know that you may not feel like an expert, so there are other steps that you can take. First of all, I recommend that you continue to reflect on your experience. This often happens naturally, but sometimes we have to build in space for reflection. Also, you now have these tools, so keep using them. Continue translating your study away outcomes into career-related competencies, and continue to practice this interview process. Again, the more you reflect, the more you'll understand the connections. I also highly encourage you to meet with the PLU Career Advisor. Lastly, continue to build on your experiences and expand or strengthen your knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So you could join clubs, work on language skills, take specific classes, do an internship, or possibly volunteer. So there's also several relevant sources that can help you with these next steps. PLU Alumni and Student Connections has great online resources for resumes, cover letters, internships, and interviews. That department is definitely the expert in all things career related, so you'll definitely want to check out the resources and connect with them personally. And the very last thing I want to mention is that AIFS developed a student guide on study abroad and career development. So it talks about a lot of the things that we've just worked on in this workshop. In order to find it, you could do a quick Google search for the PDF, or you could also locate the link on the PLU Study Away website. Okay, I really hope that you found this helpful, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about global education at PLU.